we go. This is the meeting of the Planning Committee of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority for September the 2nd. Thank you all for being here. And we will begin with public comment. Let it be noted that 4 members are present. 1 member is absent, David Durant. Are we expecting him? We are expecting him, okay. And all other members are present. And that would be Kevin Romick, Janet Abelson, Dave Hudson, and Karen Mitchoff. Okay, is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? Nope, okay. Then we will move to the approval of the minutes of July 1st.
Second.
Okay, motion by Hudson, seconded by Romick. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections? Any abstention? Motion carries with all ayes except for David Durant, who is, as earlier noted, not present. The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, there is a motion by Karen Mitchoff, seconded by David Hudson and Kevin, what?
Third by Romick.
Third by Romick, okay. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections? Any abstention? Motion carries by all present, noting that David Durant is not present. With that, we move over to item 11, which is the first regular item on the agenda. Is there a staff report?
Yes. And
Great.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. Hisham Naimi, Engineering Manager, will be happy to provide the staff report. In response to the 2017 RTP call for projects issued by MTC on April 29, we worked with the RTPCs over the past 3 months to develop a comprehensive list to include in the RTP. Just as a background, MTC updates the RTP every 4 years. The 2017 RTP will cover the period between 2017 and 2040. It is a financially constrained document. That means the cost of all the projects and programs in the RTP cannot exceed the amount of revenue or funding expected during the RTP period. Project must be included in the RTP before they can compete for state or federal sources. There are 2 ways for a project to be included in the RTP, either individually listed or be part of a programmatic category. Projects that affect the capacity of the transportation system or air quality must be individually listed in the RTP. Programmatic categories are used for projects that do not impact the capacity of the transportation system, such as pavement rehab jobs, safety projects, ped bike enhancement projects. In the handout in front of you, there are 3 lists. This is basically just an enlargement of what you had in your packet with no other changes. There are 3 lists: committed, financially constrained, and vision. Just briefly, projects on the committed list are either expected to be fully funded with local funds or are already funded and have environmental clearance. Projects on the financially constrained list represent Contra Costa top priority for funding in the RTP, and they are constrained by the amount of funding expected from discretionary sources over the RTP period. MTC has not yet told us what that amount is, but we are moving forward, and we have constrained the funding request to what was in the last RTP, or about $2.3 billion. The vision list is a backup list of projects in case MTC indicates that our share is more than $2.3 billion. If that happens, this is the list that we will pick projects from. Otherwise, the vision list will not be in the RTP. We have a total of 211 projects and programs with a cost of about $15.3 billion in year of expenditure dollars. And the funding requests are about $8.1 billion. Of those, 45 are on the committed list with a cost of $2.4 billion. 88 are on the financially constrained list with a cost of $7.1 billion, and 78 are on the vision list with a cost of $5.8 billion. On the vision list, there are also 5 additional BART region-wide projects that were submitted with a cost of $9.7 billion. They were not broken down by county. This is for the whole Bay Area. The RTP process is just beginning, so we will be working with MTC over the next year to ensure that our top priorities are included, those that are on the financially constrained list. At this time, we are working with the sponsors to enter information about these projects into MTC's RTP database so they can be modeled and evaluated by MTC. MTC plans to adopt the RTP in May 2017 and not May 2015 as we show in the last line on page 11.7. That was just a typo we'll fix. At this time, we are seeking your comments on the proposed list. We will be asking you in October to approve it and to approve Resolution 1549G so we can forward it to MTC. We took this list to TCC on August 27th, and they recommend approval.
Okay, thank you. Just for the record, I want it to be noted that David Durant is now here, and that means that all members of the Planning Committee are here. Okay, so are we ready for, pardon? Are there any questions from the members of the Planning Committee this time?
Yes.
Okay, Kevin?
Just for clarification, on the committed list of projects, the ones that are lined out have either been funded or completed, or status, because I'm looking at number 14 on the list.
So there are comments on the notes column.
Microphone.
So that one, number 14 under Transplan, widen Highway 4 from Laurel to Sand Creek, that was completed. That's why
Those are
it's
the one
deleted.
from Somerville to Route 160.
The one from Somersville to 160 should be on the list.
It is, and I'm just curious. I'm just.
Is yours crossed out?
Which list?
No, it's not. I'm just.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, that's not. These are fully funded. This project is underway and we completed next year. That's why it's on the committed list.
Okay.
Did I answer your question? I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question.
The cross-scout projects are finished.
They are either finished or they became unfunded, so they moved to the financially constrained or to the vision. So in the notes, there is a column at the end that's with the notes heading that explains what is happening with each project.
Did you get your?
Yeah, no, the question was, are they finished or fully funded? But no, they're crossed out because they're unfunded or they're finished instead of being fully funded. Okay.
But that particular one is not.
No, I understand that.
One of
No,
those,
I
right, yeah.
Clarify why the lines are there. Okay. Thank you. Don't worry, we'll fix it. It's okay.
Okay. Any other questions from the Planning Committee? Are there any comments from the audience? I don't have any slips. Okay. Last chance for comments from the audience on this item. Not seeing anything. Okay, then I bring it back for comments.
Move it to the October meeting.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion by Hudson, seconded by David Durant to,
Motion by David, second by David.
that would be true. Double D. All the, and then to move it means to approve it.
We're not saying
Approve
anything
doing
about
that.
We're just moving it to the
Yeah,
next
just
meeting.
move it to
Okay.
approve. We have nothing
Forward it.
TCC had nothing, just forward it to the.
Forward, okay.
For the
Thank you.
resolution to be approved.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any objections, any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. So with that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 12, which is the recommended transportation investment options for analysis in the updated draft of the 2014 countywide transportation plan and the recirculated draft subsequent EIR.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning, and I'll present this item. You will recall that we issued a draft countywide transportation plan in August of 2014 and a draft supplemental EIR in September of 2014, and those were out for review. We did not adopt the final, and in March, the authority decided to explore the possibility of developing a transportation expenditure plan for approval by the authority in May 2016, and we've now synced up the countywide plan to the development of this potential transportation expenditure plan. So the 2014 CTP is still in play. We are working on a new draft to be recirculated, and that would be at the beginning of 2016. And along with that new draft, we would have a new draft of the SEIR, which we are kind of upgrading from a supplemental to a subsequent. And there's a long footnote on page 12.1 to explain the differences between the two. We initially issued a notice of preparation for the previous EIR or SEIR in April of 2014 and received 4 responses on that. We've reissued the NOP last July 31st. Comments were due, I think, September 1st? Yesterday, okay. September 1st. And I think at this point we received 6 letters, probably 7 letters. We have 7 comment letters on this, on the notice of preparation. And our responsibility with those, with regard to those comment letters is we've told our stakeholders in the NOP or through the NOP what we plan to do with this recirculated SEIR, and we're asking them for comments if they have any concerns about the way we're addressing the SEIR, and those comments will be incorporated into the environmental document. So in January, when we issue the draft environmental document, it'll respond to those comments. We are not required to respond specifically to the individual letters at this time. So the last EIR we did had a no project alternative, and the project alternative was essentially the countywide comprehensive transportation plan, and that includes the vision, goals, and strategies in the plan. It includes the 5 sub-area action plans that were developed by the regional committees, and from that we generated a comprehensive transportation project list. So it was essentially the no project, and the countywide plan was the project. And then we looked at various alternatives for maximizing freeway performance, for focusing on increasing transit ridership, and for reducing greenhouse gases. And that's how we did the analysis for the last SEIR. With the advent of this possible transportation expenditure plan, we're kind of reorganizing the SEIR, and we're adding some new alternatives and taking away a few old ones. So we'll continue to look at the no project as an alternative to the project, and the project at this point will continue to be the full countywide transportation plan. In attachment A of your packet on page 12.5, you can see the additional alternatives. And what we're doing now is we're adding some financially constrained options into the plan itself, and those will be evaluated in the SEIR. So the first financially constrained option is the adopted 2013 Regional Transportation Plan, MTC calls it Plan Bay Area. It was adopted in July of 2013, and it puts into place a $292 billion list of projects and programs that we can evaluate, and our share of that is $3.4 billion. And we've always said, you know, we have a need of $12.4 billion, and we have funding for $3.4 billion. So we're going to start with that 2013 RTP as our basis for what the funding we have, which is $3.4 billion. And the project list for the 2017 RTP that Hisham just mentioned is quite similar to the 2013 because not a whole lot of new money came along for the 2017 RTP. Some of the projects in the RTP are listed on page 12.6, but they include the I-80 Integrated Corridor Mobility Project, 684 interchange, express lanes on 80 and 680, direct access ramps in San Ramon, arterial improvements, major transit projects such as EBART to Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh Bay Point to Hillcrest, the EBART Pittsburgh Center Station, and Capital Corridor improvements. There are also a number of pedestrian, bike, and Safe Routes to School projects in the RTP. Notice that the 2013 RTP includes a project in Pittsburgh called the James Donlin Extension. I just want you to remember that because when we go through these alternatives, I'm going to come back to that. So what we propose to do then is to look at some transportation investment options, assuming that we have $2.3 billion in new funding, and that's 2014 constant dollars, that would come from a new half-cent sales tax. Historically, we have leveraged $1 for $1 on our entire programs. Of course, our projects leverage much higher. Some of our programs leverage lower, but historically, we think we can use a leveraging factor of 1 for 1 so that in addition to the $2.3 billion in new funding that we'd get from the half-cent sales tax, there's another $2.3 billion that we would receive from other sources yet to be identified. And that could be cap and trade, that could be regional tolls, that could be new mitigation measures. We have yet to see new federal programs. So in 2003, we used an approach similar to this for the Measure J renewal. We developed 3 transportation investment options, and those 3 are listed in your packet starting on page 12.7 in attachment A. The first one is called Transportation Investment Option A, and I should mention these each add up to about an $8 billion program. 3.4 plus 2.3 plus 2.3 equals 8. Still does. The first one is called Community Focus, and it would promote safe, efficient, and accessible operations for all users to create thriving local communities. And it would prioritize investments in projects and programs that would increase transportation mode share for transit and safety for non-motorized users. And it seeks to improve community health. You'll probably see when we develop this option that it'll have a lot of transit capital investment projects and a lot of non-auto countywide capital maintenance programs. So it's essentially focused on public transit and bicycles, pedestrians, transportation for livable communities. That's option A. Option B is a little bit more balanced between roadways and transit. We're calling it the economic focus, and it would prioritize investment in projects and programs that enhance job creation and economic development. It'd be giving priorities to freeway, roadway, transit projects that serve employment centers to facilitate jobs access. It would include projects that support and improve urban goods movement. It would include capital improvement projects that improve inter-county access to housing and jobs. And really what we mean by that is this alternative includes the new freeway link, TriLink SR 239, connecting Contra Costa, Alameda, and San Joaquin counties. Alternative C, option C, is called the environmental focus, and it is, it really doesn't have any capital projects for highways, and it has very low-level investment for capital projects for transit. It's focusing primarily on how to shift those capital investments to transit operations programs that would benefit transit users. And also it includes a lot of countywide programs that would enhance and improve local streets, bike paths, trails, and more of a focus on our priority development areas and on communities of concern. There are some specialized programs that probably would be included in here. MTC is currently discussing a anti-displacement program that would prevent displacement of renters in communities of concern due to circumstances beyond their control. And there's also a possibility of having a regional advanced mitigation program in this option. It's essentially 100% programs and very little for projects. A fourth alternative is yet to be determined, and we're planning on rolling this into the SEIR in November when the authority releases its draft transportation expenditure plan. And as you know, we are working now with the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. We are working with the RTPCs, and we're going to provide the authority with the input received from those and others on projects they wish to see in a draft transportation expenditure plan. Assuming that's released in November, we hope to capture it and evaluate it in the SEIR. So those are the four new alternatives. And in addition to that, we have the NO project, the RTP, and the countywide plan as the project itself. And I want to note one thing. I mentioned the James Donlin Extension project. In option C, even though that is in the 2013 RTP, we would delete that project from option C. And that's the one case where we're not building on the 2013 RTP and accepting it as a given. We're saying we're going to pull that project out, and that would make room for some additional funding that could go back into the RTP. We can look at that for the 2017 RTP possibly. So that concludes my presentation. We're looking for the authority to give us a green light to go ahead and work on these. There's an enormous amount of consultant effort that goes into evaluating these. We have to run the travel demand forecasting model, and if we start at the end of September, by the time we run everything, check everything, document everything, we can issue a draft SEIR in January of 2016. So we're trying to get these out there for discussion, and we also plan on discussing these options with the EPAC at their meetings in September.
Okay, we'll start with questions from the committee. Karen?
Thank you. Martin, the brain forgets these things. James Donlin, you took it out because it wasn't in the 2013 plan, but isn't that what the settlement was all about, and putting James Donlin back in? So why? I just don't want anybody who reads this and doesn't see it in there.
And that's only out of option C. Yes.
Oh, it's in everything else.
It's in everything else.
Okay, that was what I didn't understand. Thank you.
Right.
So it's still in there.
It's still in there, yes. It's in here.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Okay, not seeing any. Are there any public comment slips? Any members of the public want to make a comment on items on this agenda, on this item? Okay, not seeing any. We'll bring it back to the committee for comments and a motion.
It's information.
It's information, okay. Are there any comments?
No, it's for action that you forwarded to the authority for review and approval.
Okay, motion by Mitchoff, seconded by Hudson. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections, any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. With that, we'll move on to item number 14, which is the approval of amendment number 1 to agreement 420. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. Start all over. Item 13, approval of amendment number 2 to Gray Bowen Scott agreement number 366. And I'll leave it to the staff to do the staff report.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll present this item. Martin Engelman, Deputy for Planning. And the Gray Bowen Scott team, he is represented here tonight by Matt Todd. He is one of the VPs over at Gray Bowen Scott. And if you have any questions that I can't answer, I'll ask him to come up and answer these. We've been working with the Gray Bowen Scott team on this amendment for the last couple of months. And you'll notice in the board packet there is a long history of background where it all began in January 2013 and what happened with amendment number 1. And then we go into amendment number 2. Essentially, the Gray Bowen Scott team was brought on board to help us with the public outreach for the countywide transportation plan. And I should mention the reason we have all this documentation in the staff report is that this project is being federally funded, and we want to make sure that we have full documentation in the case of an audit of how this project moved forward. It started with a $600,000 initial agreement to work on the countywide transportation plan. In July 2014, as we really launched the draft plan, we had a $1.2 million amendment, and that got us through a very significant public outreach effort that is shown in your packet as attachment 1 to Exhibit B, starting on page 1321. This public outreach effort has been completed under the $1.2 million amendment, and it involved having workshops for the countywide plan, public hearings, telephone town hall, online engagement tool, and all the things that brought us a tremendous amount of feedback. And I want to thank Lindsay Willis for really spearheading this and making it all happen with the help of the Gray Bowen team. So we received a lot of input on the CTP, and then last March, as I mentioned earlier, the authority initiated the TEP, and that effort involved further public outreach, further stakeholder engagement discussions, and in last July, the board approved attachment 2 of Exhibit B, which is on page 1328 of your packet, which is continuation of the public education and outreach plan, but in this case focused more on the transportation expenditure plan development. So we really need to carry this forward into the next fiscal year. As of August 31st, the Gray Bowen team will have fully expended the funding in Amendment 1, which amounted to $1.8 million. And we're proposing that Amendment 2 would add $1.7 million. This would get us through the next fiscal year and would continue the consultant support for the countywide plan and for the TEP, implement the full public education and outreach plan as shown in attachment 2, and would carry on as needed things like mail-outs to the public, preparation of any kind of new information items, and if we wanted to, additional telephone town halls. The proposed breakdown of the budget by task is shown on page 1333. We have in the attachments the full scope of services starting from beginning to end, and if you're wondering how it changed, attachment B shows the scope of services and track changes. breakdown of how the funds are divided among the consultants, the sub-consultants. And I do have to mention that while the agreement amendment is for 1.7 million, we have only budgeted in the FY 15-16 budget that you approved last June, 1.2 million. And so we will set a cap on this initial phase of $1 million to get us through to December. So starting now, we'll have a $1 million initial budget, and Gray Bowen will not be allowed to exceed that until we've come back and looked at the budget and figured out whether or not we have capacity for the remaining 0.7 million. We want to make sure that that's in the budget, and we'll have to make an amendment to the adopted budget at the mid-year point to accept this 1.7 million. But we know what the work is, and we know that we need essentially a 3.5 million total value contract to get us through. This would take us through July 2016 and into end of August, and at that point with the TEP, we would have handed it off to the county, and it would be tentatively be on the ballot for consideration. So we're asking your look at this amendment and forward it to the authority for approval.
Okay. Any comments?
I would just say that we looked at this. This is not the first time. Made recommendations where we thought this is budget. There may be places where we think we can save some, but frankly, I think we've hit the point where everybody's comfortable with who we're working with. We know where we got to go. It's time to keep moving ahead, and as things come up, if we can save something, we will. But I don't see this as a position where we're going to be trying to save things. It's like, what else can we do to get this thing through? I think we're all pretty committed to everybody, at least on the, and Janet can speak for herself. We know we need to do this.
Okay. Any other comments from the committee?
Hi. Yep, question.
Dave Durant?
Yep, thank you. The big question that I had on this is are we, if you will, acting prematurely at this point in making the retention, given that we really don't have certainty that everybody that would need to be on the bus is on the bus for moving forward with a measure? I know that seems like a hanging curveball or a softball, but
Well, can I add to that question?
Sure.
Because maybe this will, because I get that you're saying we can only spend $1 million up till December, and I share David's concerns. I mean, we have to spend money to make money, but this is a doubling. We trust this firm. They're not padding their contract, but we haven't made a decision whether we're going forward yet. And I don't want to get to July of 2016 and we've spent $3.5 million and found out we're not moving forward. So what kind of work is planned through December for the $100 million?
no, the 1 million.
The 1 million. Thank you. Pardon me. The 1 million. Well, even so, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And we did our town halls, I thought, last time via internet and telephone call-in. We didn't go out and spend money at locations. Correct, Lindsay? Right. So we didn't, because anyway, what's that 1 million going to be
I
spent
can
on
tell
in
you,
3 months?
And maybe Matt Todd wants to come up if he has anything to add, but you know, we've created an expenditure plan advisory committee, and they're meeting, I think, 4 or 5 more times between now and December. And each of those meetings requires that we have a place for the meeting, a public place that's big enough to hold everyone, and that we have a professional facilitator, and then we prepare for there's a lot of preparation that goes into those meetings. So that 1 million would cover the remaining EPAC meetings. It covers the completion of the public education and outreach plan that the authority approved and that is shown in attachment 2 to Exhibit B. So telephone, well, no, not telephone town halls, online engagement tool, printed surveys, in-person public comment. There's some optional things in here that are probably not in the million, and that's the additional telephone town halls. Do I have that right, Lindsay? Do you want to come up and
Well,
and
'cause
say the right things? 'Cause,
I'm looking at that, but it just seems like a ton of money.
but
I
we're
don't care, it's still money.
we're funding the essentials, and then there's some add-ons. I thought they were the telephone town halls and the end-of-year report, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
And there are telephone town halls where it's on page 31 of the package.
Is your microphone on? Just checking.
Why don't you just
It's a little
sit there?
light.
Yeah, thank you.
You gotta hit the button. There.
There we go. I'm red now. I'm live now.
You're live.
Good evening. There are telephone town halls planned to get us through December. That's part of the outreach program that was approved in July. So with the adoption of this amendment and the $1 million, that would be funding about 4 or 5 telephone town halls that would most likely happen in the October time period. It also is that entire plan that was before you in July, which has the outreach for those town halls, stakeholder toolkit. There is a mailing in there, but that would be brought back before you before any direct mailings would go out in line with that plan. This is a time and materials contract, so to go to the question of how we're going to get to July and what's going to happen. So at this point, I would say we need to get through a draft. We need to get a draft expenditure plan in place so that everyone can see what this plan is and decide if we need to continue to go forward with it. So there will be a series of check-ins as we go through, and I don't think you're going to get to July and then look back and go, how did we get here? We're going to be going through those series of steps and continue to ask that question of, are we going in the right direction? Is this a good plan to continue to carry forward?
And Mr. Durant,
It's a lot of, when I see a doubling of a contract in that period of time, it's just a lot of money.
Yes, Martin?
Commissioner Durant, you asked whether everybody was on board. Are you talking about sub-consultants or?
No,
Wasn't sure about-
I'm talking about the board itself,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Has not made a final decision that we're moving forward, in part
Well,
because the county, among others, has said that they're not sure that they want to move forward with the measure.
I should say that, it's time and materials, and this can be stopped at any time. And there are provisions in here also to support the countywide transportation plan.
Yeah.
And we'd have to determine what we do with that if we were to end the effort to pursue a TEP. But whenever you say stop, we can stop.
But another answer I would give you, David, to your question is, how do we know that we want to go forward unless we know what it is? And what I see this process as doing is helping include people from the public in the process of defining what the it is. So if it is one thing, we may want to, and if it is another thing, we may not, and we want to be educated, I think, about what that is. So this gives us the tool to do what I hope is a much better job than we did last time. Not to say that I'm not saying we did a bad job last time, but I think we have a lot more, this is another period of time. Things are more sophisticated in the information industry. And I think we found that out when we did some recent polling and processes a while back recently. And so I see this as being a more, what I'll call modern way of doing it. and trying to find out what the public wants. And so I don't know how we do that after we've defined it. We don't ask the public after we ask them along the way. That would be my opinion. So we haven't actually, speaking of the public, we have not had public comment, so I'm going to switch to public comment if there is any.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Ross.
Thank you, Chair Abelson. Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director for Projects. I'll try to add some more specificity on some of the tasks in here, and I think it builds on some of the comments from both Matt and Chair Abelson on some of the decision points for the rest of the calendar year. I'm looking at page 33. It's a summary, but I think it provides a pretty good framework of what's going to happen. Item B, public opinion research. So there's actually a poll in the field right now, and this poll is primarily targeted to introduce a possible BART measure into the county and do some sensitivity testing with that, as well as some sensitivity testing between something that may be supported by CCTA as a transportation measure and something that possibly could come from the Board of Supervisors. So that's going to give us some good data for all three entities on viability going alone or in combination. So we'll have the results of that in a matter of weeks. So we'll have some decisions there. The strategic item C, that's helping Martin wrap up the CTP, some items there. D and G are really, I think, the key right now.
Yep.
Related to the EPAC and other stakeholders. So this is getting in the field and getting engagement with folks that aren't necessarily going to come here and tell us their how they feel about different things, or enter into discussions in a different way than we as staff may be able to do, or even as board members. So that's a lot of consulting advice, research, reaching out for folks and getting the opinions that Chair Abelson was addressing. And then the item E, that's really getting the direct public engagement. So that does include the proposed telephone town halls that if we go forward with those, I believe, as scheduled, that'd be about $200,000. So really, to get to the point in October and November where we want to release a draft, we're probably looking in the range here of about, I haven't done the math, I'm trying to do it in my head right now. It's probably close to $500,000 or $600,000. There are always pullback points, but that's really where we think we'd have a complete assessment of EPAC and other stakeholders, kind of the inside baseball folks with our TPCs in the city and so forth, and then the direct public input. So again, we can pull back anytime we want, but I think that's really the first time where we'll see a picture from the three primary sources we're trying to get input from.
Yeah, thank you. That seems eminently reasonable to me.
Okay. I'm going to switch, if it's okay, to the public.
No, I've got one more question. Ross, you said we should have results in a week. Does that mean that we'll, at our full authority meeting, we might have some preliminary data on the polling?
Yeah, that is the hope, is that we will have that, and there may be some discussion scheduled at one of your meetings as well with the board. So I don't think everything's been finalized, but the goal is to have both those discussions in September.
Thank you.
Kevin.
A few comments. I think it's important that we vet this out with the public as much as possible, gather as much information as we can, and stack the deck as much in our favor as we can before we make our decisions. And so everybody looks at us and says, that was a no-brainer. Why didn't you just go ahead and do the process? Yeah. And having as much information as possible before we get there helps us provide that. My concern comes with we spend all this money and we sit there in July, and the question I have here has to do with the sales tax cap.
That the governor wouldn't sign.
They wouldn't sign. So there are no issues going into this, that some of our communities may have reached their limits already, and that would prohibit us from engaging in this process as we look forward in here?
We have authority that sunsets in 2020 that would allow us to go out with a countywide transportation measure that could exceed the caps. Now, the reverse of what you're talking about is certainly something we're weighing is where we can exceed a cap. If there's a city that has, say, a penny left, we'd be taking up half of that penny. If they had a half a cent left, we'd be taking that up. And they would not be able to go forward unless they got either special legislation, probably special legislation, at least in the governor's veto message. He says, I'm not going to support any broad base increase in the cap, but I'd consider, jurisdictions on a case-by-case basis. So we can go forward, but we need to be mindful that we might be making it more difficult for jurisdictions to go forward by eating up all or a portion of the cap that they might have.
Unless they go out at the same time and pass. So if they have a 0.5% left and they go out and pass and we pass, ours rides over the top of theirs.
Yes, and that introduces another item that we need to study here is it could very well be a very crowded ballot in 2016 with potentially BART, potentially us or the county, and potentially we're counting as many as 7 jurisdictions around the county that may be considering going to the ballot. So whereas what Director Osaki is saying is correct, technically that would work that way, but can we all survive on the same ballot? That's something we'll be also looking at through some of these polling. So the polling, I know you like to talk about that. We're in the current round of polling. That's really this BART County CCTA sensitivity is the primary reason for that. After we release a draft in November, that's probably the next time we'd hit the street polling. So about end of the year, again, they have to kind of time that with the holidays to see what works. But that would, if we get that far, that would be the next time that we would send the crew into the field to do polling.
Okay, shall we move to public comment? Speaking of that, are there any speaker slips? Anyone from the public? It's been a very quiet day that way. Okay, we'll bring it back. So this item is item number 13, and it's an action item.
If I understand this, what you're asking is to move Amendment 2, Agreement 366 to the full board for approval. I'll move it.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Hudson, seconded by Durant. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objection? Any abstention? Motion carries unanimously. With that, we'll move on to item number 14, which is approval of Amendment number 1 to Agreement 422 and Agreement 438 with ARA for consultant support for the PDA planning grants. Hi, Brad.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. In November of 2012, MPC adopted Resolution 4035 and had a number of funding programs, one of which was the PDA Planning Grant Program. The authority got $2.745 million through that program. In September of last year, we selected 10 planning grants and 5 consulting teams that could do that, and over the following months, the sponsors chose the consultants they wanted to work with, and ARAP was selected for 4 of those, San Pablo Avenue Complete Streets in the county, Rodeo and Crockett, Grant, Salvio, and Oak Street Corridor Plan in Concord, Downtown Congestion Plan, study in Lafayette, and the Iron Horse Trail Overcrossing Environmental Clearance in San Ramon. And in March, the authority approved their contract for $1.162 million. Because that contract, and we also approved a $50,000 notice to proceed so that they could begin work on their 4 projects. Because the agreement for 22 was more than $1 million, it had to go through this process of review at Caltrans, a process that took 2 months to do. And eventually we got a letter back saying that with a few modifications, the contract was okay. And we have made those modifications, and the authority approved the contract with those modifications. But one of the things that Caltrans said was that we could not fund any of the work done prior to July 10th, when we received the letter, through the contract. So what we're proposing tonight is that the $43,000 or almost $44,000 that Arup spent under the NTP, under the notice to proceed that they did in good faith, that we fund that through Measure J, and that we reduce their contract that uses the federal funds, that's Agreement 422, by the same amount. So it's basically reducing the federal amount and using Measure J to make it up. So the total contract amount would remain at $1.162 million. So that's what we're asking tonight, amend Agreement 422 and approve a new Agreement 438. It's sort of a housekeeping action that's needed to take to comply with federal requirements.
Any questions from the committee? Randy?
Commissioners, I have a comment on this. So it was brought to my attention. This is the issue that we have gone to Washington, D.C. for at least 5 board chairs, and we've talked about this process called Letter of No Prejudice. And it frosts me over this issue, and I've had a conversation with the chief deputy there, Kome Ajise at Caltrans. We get an E-76 that's approved by the federal government. We start work in good faith. We have a clean audit, and yet it's deemed a $48,000. $44,000 ineligible, and we got a clean audit. Now, the reason why it takes so long to build a federally funded contract is because we got to wait all this time before we spend a dime. And the idea is to get these projects underway early, and then if we have a clean audit, which we did, we should get reimbursed. And they finally put that in the DRIVE Act. Everybody that's been a board chair here, you heard us talk about that same issue over and over and over again, and finally the federal government says that's a good idea. So then we get caught here because anything over $1 million has got to go through the audits. So what we're asking, and hopefully we won't have to act on this by the board meeting, but to me we're going in the opposite direction. We're getting slower, not faster, and we're trying to help the region here, our county, get the money to work faster. And just to me, it makes me very angry, and that's why I'm saying what I'm saying, is because we're still working with headquarters to try to fix this issue. So we don't have to use our measure money. That's what we got federal money for. So thank you for indulging me for a second.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Okay, why don't we, okay, there's a motion by Mitchoff, seconded by Hudson. Are there any audience comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee, and are we ready to vote?
Yep.
All in favor of this is item number 14, please say aye. Aye. Any objections, any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. And with that, we move to item 15, other business. I don't believe there is any.
I was going to say that.
Where? There it is.
Well, I have some other stories that I was complaining about Caltrans, but I won't say those tonight because I'm still angry about that. But I have some really good news. It's embargoed until tomorrow, but there's a company, there's a magazine called Digital Government, and we made an application, and we were going to be awarded tomorrow. You'll be notified that we've won one of the achievement awards nationwide for government to citizens, local government category, best innovative use of social media. So we applied for the award. Lindsay actually did. She's doing a great job. Lindsay, you're doing a great job. But she won that, and I don't know how many applicants there were from across the nation, but I call it ourselves a pea shooter organization, but we were recognized for that. In addition, we hosted a Transportation Research Board panel meeting here on autonomous vehicles this morning. So experts from all over the United States met in our Diablo room, and I'm the chair of this panel looking at research on social impacts on autonomous vehicles, and for some reason they think this is the center of the autonomous vehicle craze. So that's great news. And there was a Guardian article. The Guardian is a newspaper out of London that's like the third most read newspaper in the world, and they did a public records act on us, and we sent them some email, and in one of the email Apple is mentioned, and so they put 1 and 1 together and got 3, and they said, oh, this is a definite proof that they're testing or building an electric autonomous vehicle. So I don't know how many emails we got, and our website went from 100 pings a week to 5,000 or 4,000 in one day. So it was a crazy, but Lindsay got accepted onto a TRB outreach committee that's looking in research on the best, most effective, or measuring the effectiveness of public involvement in transportation. So there's ways of scaling back what we want to do, if that's what you want to do on the previous agenda item. You know, we want to do it in all 4 of the subregions, but if we want to scale back at the time, we can make that decision. That's, as they were saying, time and materials contracts. So there's some flexibility there, but people are starting to copy our website verbatim. It's crazy out there. So I just want to give Lindsay some credit, and then Ross is doing a great job leading the TEP development. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, the next item is news clippings and correspondence. Do we have anything to pass along? Okay, not seeing anything. We are adjourned then until our next meeting, which is on October the 7th at 6 p.m. Here at the Authority. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.